What's up, Bodyweight Warriors? Welcome back to another video, and the sunrise sea swims are back, although it's definitely not sunrise. I think sunrise is about 5 AM at the moment. This is the time of year where the grind through winter and turning out when it was like -degrees, hopping in the water, absolutely freezing. Now it's like June, it's about 20 degrees outside. The water is cold, but it's nice. It's just an all-round treat. Great way to start the day.
Oh yeah, before we properly jump into the video, I forgot to say, I finished the kitchen finally. I know I said I was going to do some more DIY sort of stuff, but I just haven't figured out how to film it. But yeah, I essentially did all of this minus the worktops. That's a little bit more out of my level of expertise, but looks pretty alright.
So just for a quick after and then the before.
Pretty good. Right, we are back. I feel like it's been a while since we probably had a bit of a conversation and like a vloggy sort of video. I'll be honest, I've just life's been pretty busy the past few weeks, and I just haven't really felt like making those sort of videos. It's been forced, and I just didn't want to do that. So anyway, we're back as of today, and I want to make videos, but the thing is, sometimes life just feels very monotonous. Like, I feel like I could share stuff that I'm doing, but ultimately it's like the same thing that I've been doing for a long time, and part of me is like, is that boring, or is that interesting? I don't know. Anyway, that's the reason that I haven't posted many of these as of recently. But today I've actually got a topic that I kind of want to talk about, and I think it would work better in this format, and we can have some sort of discussion. First of all, what is going on with this haircut today? I've only just noticed this. Oh, that looks terrible. Yeah, the thing that I want to talk about is that the kind of concept of trying to achieve everything at once. I was just reading back through kind of comments generally on videos on this channel this morning, and that was kind of one of those things that was like, I want to train for middle splits, strength stuff, skill stuff, handstands, but then I also want to go for a run, and I want to do this other sport. It's like, okay, yeah, it's a little bit complicated. It's going to be pretty hard to kind of figure out. Ultimately, you can do that, but let's not expect to make really good progress in anything, because it's just not going to happen. Let's think of it this way. We've got one fundamental principle when it comes to training, and that is the SAID principle: specific adaptation to imposed demand. So you get better at the things that you do. Now, this is a pretty straightforward principle to get. You want to get good at the planche, like I'm trying to work on at the moment. You train more for the planche. You want to get good at handstands, you train more for handstands. It's really quite that simple. However, the issue is when you have lots of different goals going at the same time. How do you manage that? How do you work towards certain ones? And how do you keep the skills or the strength that you've built or taken time to in the past? I think this is one of the big cruxes of just training long term in general, because you can't do it all. And I think really we all know this. We all know we can't do everything at once, but we still kind of try, and it's a little bit frustrating. Now, most of this comes down to a little bit of FOMO. You kind of feel like you're missing out if you're not training for everything. But ultimately, if you train for everything, that's actually where you're really going to miss out on things. I don't think social media helps this. Obviously, people posting all of these different drills and things to try, and it's fun to try out these things. But if that's what you choose to do, if you want variety to be the mainstay of your training, that's fine. But just understand that that also means that you're probably not going to make great progress in most of the things that you end up doing. It's kind of a toss-up between, I guess, having fun and being a little bit monotonous. Ultimately, the consistency one does lead to some fun once you actually get the moves or do the things that you want to do. But anyway, what I wanted to kind of make a video on today is a little bit to help you out when it comes to trying to combine everything together, because ultimately that's what I've worked and tried to figure out over the past 4, 5, 6, 8 8 years, maybe. Some of those years more successfully than others, but I kind of think that I've found a little bit of a sweet spot. So let me give you some rules and some things to follow. I'm gonna start running out of places to sit in a second. Okay, rules to follow. Don't train for more than 1 or 2 competing skills, strength moves, flexibility stuff at the same time. So a very simple example of this would be training the handstand push-up and the planche at the same time. It's going to be a hard one to do. It's going to be a lot of overload on similar muscle groups. So ultimately, you're going to sacrifice some progress in each to make progress in both. Just as a general rule of thumb, I would probably choose 1, 2, 3 goals maybe, and that would be covering handstand strength and flexibility to kind of focus on, and then everything else just kind of goes on to some basic maintenance, but you should still make some progress in them. Rule number 2 kind of comes between learning the difference between building, gaining, and maintenance. It takes a lot more energy to gain than it does to maintain. That's very simple. If you want to put a metric on it, I think Poliquin has mentioned it takes about 6 times less effort to maintain something than gain something. So a very simple example of that is if we were doing 6 sets of something per week, it would probably only take us 1 set per week to kind of maintain the level we are at. This kind of applies to strength training as well, a little bit less to handstands and more neurological skills. The last rule really is rule number 3, and that is just understand the relationship between volume and intensity. This one's kind of a basic one, really. It's the basics of strength training. Things that are intense, that's going to be basically the closer it gets to being able to do 1 of something, the more intense it is. If you can do 20 of something, it's less intense. And then volume is how much of that thing are you doing? Are you doing 10 sets in a session? Are you doing 20 sets in a session? Are you doing 30 sets in a session? That's the amount of volume, and those two are kind of linked together. Okay, so we've decided what we're going to work on. We're not working on too much. We've got a little bit of an understanding of volume and intensity. We're going to try and not overdo either or. Now is a good time to try and assess a little bit how your current training has been going. So very, very simply, have you been making progress in the past 6 to 8 weeks? Can you do more than you did before? Are you a little bit better, etc.? You make progress? Good. I would say keep doing that. Progress is actually pretty hard to make, and it's certainly hard to make consistently, so if you're making it, I wouldn't change too much. I'd just keep doing it until you don't, and then reflect on things. If you're not making progress, then bad news, but we can ultimately fix that. What should you do? First of all, I would recommend doing less. I know maybe not what you expected to hear. Ultimately, people's usual reaction to if they're not making progress is like, I'll add this drill in that I saw online that this person recommended, and I'll try and do a little bit more work here, and I'll do more work there. And ultimately, they start adding more to that scales and adding more to that requirement of recovery. And actually, more often than not, I very, very, very rarely see people who don't do enough. Most people are doing enough and then some. Before ever adding extra work, you should always take away work first and see how you get on with doing a little bit less. In terms of changing it, also it's worth considering the individual. So obviously some people can tolerate more training than other people. If you're older, you're going to need a little bit less training. If you're young, you can do a lot more. Hormones are a magical thing. If you've been training for a long period of time, you can likely handle more stress of training, you can do more. If you've not been training that long, you probably don't need that much to see progress. And finally, obviously you need to consider your lifestyle. Are you a teenager who has very little worries and can spend all of their time training, or are you in your mid-30s, you've got a few kids, you've got a mortgage that you've got to pay, etc., etc. That stress is going to impact your ability to do training, and the likelihood is doing a lot less would actually be better. So in the instance of maybe the teenager, yeah, they might get on well working at 3 or 4 different skills at the same time. But if I was coaching somebody like the other example in your mid-30s who's got a lot of other things going on, they're definitely the sort of person who's going to need to focus on just like one thing at a time to make decent progress with it. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about how skills and training interact with each other. So we're going to use a few different examples for this one. First of all, the person who wants to achieve handstand stuff but then also keep a little bit of strength and flexibility. So handstand is your main focus in this instance. Because handstands is a complex movement, it's neurological in nature, actually you can't overdo it. In normal instances, you probably can't do enough. More isn't going to be the thing that holds you back with handstands, because it's just not the same as strength training. But doing too much strength training or too much other work that is intense will take away from your handstands. the way I like to think about this is if I'm doing handstands, that's complex, so my strength training needs to be super simple. That's going to be basically working minimal effective dose when it comes to volume and doing basic movements. My go-to personally would be, let's just train handstand push-up and one arm chin-up progression. That's kind of all I would focus on for the strength stuff, and then really go ham at doing the handstands and all the handstands related strength like tuck or press work. The flexibility work you can probably just add in as well as normal because it's very unrelated in comparison to the strength and handstands. Next, we have somebody who just wants to get gains. They just want to focus on the strength side of things, but they want to achieve the planche, the handstand push-up, the one arm chin up, the front lever, the muscle up, and God knows what other goals at the same time. Just don't do that. It's not a good shout to do, and it's something that I wasted a lot of time on in my early days of training, trying to achieve everything at one time. And that's before I learned the concept of free gains, which actually, shout out to Mindful Mover, Philip Chubb, he's great at talking about this, about how you can train for just a few things and you'll be able to actually have the ability to do lots of things. It's the basics of strength training, transferability. My personal perspective is I would always train bent arm skills before straight arm skills. Bent arm is going to help build that foundation of strength, that muscular strength, and then you can then capitalize on that when you then go to work on your straight arm strength, like the planche, which is essentially what I'm doing at the moment. I worked up to 5 handstand push-ups and a bunch of other different bent arm strengths, and now I feel like I'm actually finally in the place to properly work on my planche, as opposed to before when I was trying to do everything at once and I could barely do one handstand push-up when I was trying to do it. It was not going to happen. Because we talked about it's harder to gain than it is to maintain. Once you achieve those skills, you can put them on the back burner. You can do a sixth of the volume, quite a lot less than you were doing originally, and then start working on the other skill. Example number 3 is the person who wants to work on their flexibility stuff. That's kind of their focus. They want to get flexible, but they also want to keep up some general strength and conditioning around them. Now, flexibility and strength actually do compete with one another quite a lot. They're both quite taxing to the central nervous system. And this is actually something that I talked to Daniel Vadnor about, Fitness FAQs, when we had that brief podcast at talking about the planche, but also talking about how the fact that he's dropped a lot of his stuff to focus on his flexibility, his mobility development, and how he's found that quite an intense form of training. And I personally can definitely relate to that. When I was achieving the middle side splits and the front splits, I didn't actually do a whole lot of lower strength training, and that's because I knew that this would take away from my ability to make progress with side splits. I'm not saying don't train strength, don't train legs if you're going to do flexibility, because ultimately you can definitely do both at the same time. Things like Romanian deadlifts, that's going to develop hamstring flexibility and strength at the same time. You can definitely do both, but you may want to dial back the strength work just a little bit so that you give yourself the recovery capacity to do the flexibility work. Again, kind of like the handstand example, I would keep my leg strength really basic. In this instance, I would do some core lifts, maybe one accessory movement, but the rest of my training is going to be my flexibility stuff, because that's going to be my priority. So to answer kind of the point of the video, which is talking about how to combine lots of different things at the same time, the answer is kind of don't, or certainly don't combine lots of things that are competing. Take your time to develop skills and then move on to the next goal. But I think that's kind of it for the ramblings on combining programs. Ultimately, it's a bit of a nuance. So I want to pass the question off to you. Do you have any way that you particularly like to set things up? Have you found stuff that's been successful for you? Why not let everyone else know in the comment section down below? Share your opinion on this one. I'd love to hear it. While you're down there, you can also hit that thumbs up button and support the channel. Right next to it is that subscribe button if you don't miss out on any more future videos. Especially because we're going to be getting back a little bit to the vlog stuff. I've got some exciting trips planned and people to meet up with and things to do now that things are finally open after the virus has kind of fluttered away a little bit. But yeah, stay tuned for that one. Other than that, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Have a strong week and peace.